Mac is over there.
Okay, so today we have a very special guest, Rabbi Friedman. Many of you guys know Rabbi Friedman, and he's here in Eretz Israel. Actually, took the country by storm, I would say, literally. And it's always very nice when we have an opportunity to hear Divrei Torah from a fine and outstanding individual, a person who really appreciates Chachma, loves Chachma, and puts his whole life to be Ma'abed Torah B'Yisrael. So to us, it really is a very special privilege to hear Rabbi Friedman say a few words with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Shea. First, I want to, before I get into the topic we're going to talk about, which I think is very interesting, how fortunate you guys are to be here. And I mean that sincerely. I know Rabbi Shea for many years, Rabbi Tzeit Shlita, and his Derech HaLimud is something which is really unique and incisive, and will set you up for life in terms of a life of understanding Torah and Chachmas Hashem, and really is something which is really unique. And I think being in a small place, at least for the first year, next year is going to, obviously grow, is something that's to your tremendous advantage, to have the opportunity really to have one-on-one situations with Rabbeim here, and it really is a tremendous opportunity for you. I was just thinking about this morning. Someone sent me a video. One of these I'm a member of this rabbinical council, and someone sent the video. You have to watch this video because it's instructive and talk to students about it. So I'll mention it quickly. I think it's a lemaisa for some of the things that you guys may be experiencing. It was a video about bullying. And there happened to be a woman that was a newscaster. You might be able to find it online. She was a newscaster. And one of the people that watch the show says that since you're a newscaster and you influence so many people watch you, you're really overweight and you're obese. And therefore, you should take responsibility and not be a role model for other people, that you should be overweight. You should watch your health. So she had a whole, like a 4-minute spiel on this, and saying that she was very offended by the comments. She said, you don't have to tell me that I'm overweight, because I know I'm overweight. So she said this is an example of bullying, and she says kids get bullied all the time. So what was her message? She said, I've gotten hundreds of emails, supporting me and telling me how wrong this guy is. So she said, so the message is that if you're ever bullied, don't listen to the bullies, listen to the people that support you, So it sounded interesting, but then when I thought about it, it's logically ridiculous. Why? Maybe help me out here. Why? Because she should really be saying that you should judge your own self-worth by your own self-worth, not by what other people think of you. Because if your system is what other people think of you, so what if there's a lot of bullies and only one person comes to support you? That means you should give up, right? So the answer is you should always judge something by the quality of the product, not by the quantity. So in this year too, Baruch Hashem, you have a million of guys, and that's what counts. It doesn't matter if you had 100 guys or not. You should go by the quality of the program, and you shouldn't be impressed by the number. So really yashikov to Rabbi Cheit and to all the guys that are really building a tremendous Macham Torah. So I wanted to discuss, and I must admit, I didn't get a tremendous amount of time to prepare this, but I have some interesting thoughts to share with you. There was a question that came up in the one of the local newspapers in the 5 towns about whether a proprietor of a ice cream store was allowed to sell ice cream to someone that was morbidly obese. That was the question. They said, is that a violation of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Nuchsha? Okay? So I was really amazed by the question, because Baruch Hashem in the 5 towns, it's almost on the level of Yerushalayim or Kodesh, in Modi'in, that people are so makbid on halacha, that this guy's asking, whether I can sell ice cream. It's an amazing question. We wouldn't have these questions years ago. I mean, I'm sure that their books and records are 100% glad kosher, and every penny they take in cash is reported to the IRS. So, they were now on the level of asking shilos about, can I sell ice cream to a person coming in? So, of course, there's many implications. It wouldn't just be about ice cream. It would be about, before someone walks into my store, I should have them check their cholesterol before I sell them a hamburger or a French fry. So, question is, how far does Lifnei Iver go? So I started looking into it a little bit. And today's shiur is not for the purpose of psak. You'll ask your Rosh Hashiva how we would hold on a particular issue. But in looking at the Minchas Chinuch and the Gemara, there's many interesting issues that come up in terms of Lifnei Iver. If the guys from Rambam are tuning in, I want to say hi to all the guys back home and welcome to the shiur. I don't know if they can participate or not. hopefully we'll see each other very soon. Anyway, so the Gemara starts out like this. It's Gemara that's quoted a number of cases, and it says, Minayin, how do you know that a person should Minayin shelo yoshid adam yain l'nazir, a person shouldn't hold out a cup of wine to a nazir, right? Or Eivor Menachai to a ben Noach, right? A guy who's not allowed to eat Eivor Menachai, it's one of the Shavim Mitzvot ben Noach, and a Jew who's a nazir is not allowed to eat drink wine. So how do you know you're not allowed to do that? To facilitate this? So it says, because it says, Gemara says, Lifnei Iver lo sitin mechshel. So that's one of the sources of the Gemara that says that Lifnei Iver lo sitin mechshel means basically not to cause a guy stumbling block. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this. You probably have heard many of these questions. You know, if I make a bar mitzvah and have relatives that aren't religious, can I invite them for Shabbos or not? And how do you deal with those many practical types of questions? So I want to share with you some of the thoughts of the Rishonim, and I think not so much again for the sake of psak. Maybe we'll get to a couple of practical issues, but really to show you, I think, the beauty of a Gemara and how, like, each word has a nuance to it and can be dissected and understood logically and theoretically in many different fashions. So one of the things the Ran jumps in right away, and the Gemara is found in Avodah Zarah Daf Vav Amavez and Daf Zayin. Jumps in and he says, what's this idea of kos yain l'nazir? Like, why does the Gemara give me that case in particular? All right? So he says an interesting insight. He says, because for you, you're a non-nazir. So for you, it's mutter. So maybe you'll say that the whole problem of me causing you to do an avera is when it would be something that's also for me. So I can't eat chazer, I can't give you a piece of chazer. Okay, so I understand that. But how do you know if something is mutter for me and you take on, in this case, an optional isser? You decide to take a vow of Nazirus, right? So I can't cause you to, how do you know that such a case is going to be prohibited? So he says that's what Lifnei Iver comes to tell me. Meaning to say, it would seem to be along the lines of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. In other words, in the same way that I can be motzi you if I was already Yotzei Mitzvah, I could blow the shofar for you, even though if you hadn't heard the shofar yet. In fact, many hold I could even make a bracha. Better you should make a bracha, but I can make a bracha also. Because Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, I can do certain things for you, right? So too, I can't do or help you do an avera, even though that avera may be permissible for me, that action may be permissible for me, I still can't do it for you. So that would be a model of that concept. It's not just simply causing you to do an avera that we all know is also, it's an avera that's particular to you that may not be applicable to me. And then he goes a step further, and what's this idea of Eivor Menachai to a guy? Because the answer is, guy's not a Jew. Right? So you might say that in such a case that it's completely mutter. In other words, only if someone is in the system of taryag, right? Of taryag mitzvos that I can't facilitate the avera. But where do you see that I can't cause a guy to do an avera? He says, so that's the chiddush of the Gemara that says even Eivor Menachai to a guy, to tell me I simply can't participate, I can't facilitate an issur. And again, different approaches you could suggest. There's a Rambam that talks about the mitzvah of Al-Chev Tochiach Hasam Yisacha. We studied some of this last year, the guys in Rambam, if you remember, doing the mitzvah shiur, and the Rambam says that if you could prevent the guy from doing an issur, and you fail to do so, Rambam used the lashon hu nitpas also of, and you're dragged in, so to say, you become attached to that issur, because the fact that you didn't stop someone from doing an issur means that avera, so to say, becomes, that ma'aseh is shared with you, if you will. And it's both a halachic violation and a philosophical violation, in the sense that you didn't care strongly enough about this issur that you would stop to prevent it. Certainly if you saw someone killing another person, you would intervene, because it's a horrible thing. You don't want that avera to take place. So even if it's something that you don't deem to be, so problematic, you still have to intervene, because if it's a violation of the Torah, it's a violation of the Torah, and you would have the affirmative obligation to try to stop it. So anyway, that would be a basic understanding of that Gemara. According to the Ran at least, that yain for a nazir is prohibited because even though it's also for him, and even for a guy, it's also, even though it's not in our system at all, but still in all, you shouldn't be involved in facilitating a violation of the Torah. Okay. Now, of course, it sounds like, and one could explain, that this only would apply to Isuri Daraisa, right? There's no inference over here that it applies to Isuri Drabanan. In fact, in Minchas Chinuch, If you want to study it on your own, Minchas Chinuch is a terrific sefer. It deals with a lot of the basic concepts of the mitzvos and basic chakiros as well. So it raises the question, does it apply to an Isser Drabanan or not? And he wants to suggest from a Tosos in Shabbos that it does. And you might interpret it to mean that there's a Lifnei Iver on Drabanans, or even suggest that the Lifnei Iver on Drabanans is itself a Drabanan, because the Mishnah in Shabbos says as follows. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It talks about to violate Shabbos, a person has to do an Akira and Hanacha. Now, there's an Akira in Rosh Hashanah and Hanacha in Rosh Hashanah, or Rosh Hashanah, or vice versa. So the Gemara has a classical case. If let's assume that outside this window was a thoroughfare, a main thoroughfare, a Rosh Hashanah, and inside was a Rosh Hashanah. So if there's someone standing outside an ani and he wants to, pick something up. So if he picks it up, he stretches his hand inside, and I'm holding my hand like this, and he stretches his hand, puts it inside the house, right? He carries it out to outside, he puts it down. He did an Akira in the Rosh Hashanah, he did a Hanach in the Rosh Hashanah. So he is chayav. The Gemara says he's chayav. And the Balabayas on the inside is pater. The Gemara goes so far as to say pater means mutter. The guy on the inside is perfectly cool, absolved, he didn't do anything wrong. He's no different than a bookshelf where the piece of bread is standing on top of the bookshelf, right? So Tosos there as a kashi saying, why are you saying it's mutter? This guy inside is over lifnei iver. He's facilitating the guy for doing an avera, right? So Tosos has many different approaches, and he wants to suggest that perhaps that still in all there's a separate concept that you're not allowed to lahafrisha miyusur. You have an affirmative obligation to prevent the guy from doing an isser. It's not enough that it's not only is it also daraisa to cause a guy to do an isser, right, and to give the wine to the nazir or the ever menachai to the guy, but if I see someone doing something wrong, I would have to stop in and actually prevent them from doing it. Okay, so according to Tosos, that might be a chiv drabanan, but nonetheless, that might be, according to some interpretations, under the concept of ever menachai. And it's interesting. There's another Gemara. If you look in the Torah Tmima, if you look in the Torah Tmima, I don't know if you've had a chance to really study the Torah Tmima, which is a really terrific resource. He quotes many different drashos on the pasuk in the Kedoshim of Ever Menachai, and one of the quotes of Gemara in Moikan, it says, Tanya, Remez Litzion Kvaros Minatar Minayin. How do we know there's a concept that you should mark graves? Okay, so we have on graves, we have tombstones, right? So a tombstone on a grave really has two levels. One is covered a mace. In other words, it talks about the niftar, and it brings kavod to the mace, that we remember who this person is and the type of lifestyle they live, and we pay tremendous tribute to them. But there's another aspect, which is to make sure a Kohen doesn't go in that area, because if a Kohen is walking and he doesn't know it's a cemetery, right? The only we know it's a cemetery because today they're fenced in and we have with tombstones. But if he didn't know that, so he'd walk over, he'd become tummy. So the Gemara says, "Minayin l'tzion kvaros min HaTorah, Amar Abaye lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol." So the Gemara quotes Abaye that says that this is based upon the idea of lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol. So I guess the question I would ask you is, that would seem to be a daraisa concept, and Tosos seems to be suggesting that, meaning to say, preventing a guy from sinning, right? You would have the obligation as the balabayas inside the house to prevent the guy from sinning and not be there. Kind of when you see an honey down the street, shut your windows, lock the door, make sure the guy can't come and take your bread, right? So that Tosos suggests is only at best or at worst an Isser Drabanan, because your obligation is to stop him from doing an Isser. Over here it seems to be that there's an idea of actually marking a grave so that a Kohen shouldn't come by and perhaps pass by and step on the grave, right? So it seems to be cases, if I would have to, on a Doraisa level, stop a Kohen and mark a grave in the slight chance, 10% chance, that Kohen may be passing by one day, right? So then, of course, according to Tosos, I should have to prevent the guy from doing an Isser and taking the bread out of my hand, right? So perhaps one could suggest, of course, there's two different cases. And in the case of taking the bread out of the hand, you're dealing with an actual Isser, where the guy is actually violating an Isser, right? So Tosos said that's an Isser Drabanan, and you're Chayv L'Hafrisha, you would have to, it's a Drabanan obligation to stop him. In this case, the Gemara says it's a Remez. Remez doesn't mean to say it's a real Isser D'Oraisa. Remez means to say it's a correct thing to do, but it's not obligatory. In other words, the Gemara, if you look at that Gemara, it doesn't seem to indicate that this is the actual pshat in the pasuk of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Michshol. Means they have to go so far as to prevent a possible scenario. It's like a midas chasidus. It's a good thing to do, but it would not be on the. You can't learn from there the fact that on a practical level, if there was an actual isser, I would have to jump in and stop the guy. That still would be an isser. That would be a chiv drabanan. And here the Gemara is saying there's an asmach, that there's a remez that would be a good thing to do to prevent the guy, not only to stop a guy from doing an isser actively, which Tosfos holds as drabanan, but to set up a system which would be consistent with the Torah philosophy of trying to prevent the guy, of anticipating potential people from sinning and try to accommodate that as well. But that would not seem to be the real isser of Lifnei Iver. It would only be a remez. Now, what I found fascinating is when you look into Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Michshol, I think we've all associated it with trying to prevent people from doing an avera. I think that's usually the understanding. But if you look at the Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvahs, he says something amazing. He says, mitzvah is Reish study test. It's the 299th mitzvah. In Losa says, he says, Ha-hazhara, Shehuzharnu milahachshul zeh b'svara. All right, very pertinent over here. He says we're forewarned from tricking each other with svara, with understanding, areas of understanding. And the isra is she'im yishalcha etza v'davar she'enu baki bo. This is the primary isra, right? If a person were to ask you something in an area that they are not experts in, right? Ask you for financial advice, okay? Harei ba hazhar milahatoso milaramoso. The Torah forewarns us from giving the guy wrong advice and from deceiving the guy. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second, how that's different than midrash tirchak. Ela horehu torehu al hadavar sh'ata chosho shu nachon. But rather, you should instruct the guy in the manner that you think is correct. V'hu amro yisala, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu, in the exalted manner, told us, v'lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. Don't fool a guy. Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Michshol means to say, don't give a guy bad advice. He's not talking about averos. In other words, the guy asks you financial advice, medical advice, practical advice. You got to give the guy actual good advice. Uloshen Sifri, and the Sifri comments, V'lifnei Suma B'davar, before someone who is blind. Doesn't mean literally a blind person. A person who's blinded in that area. They're ignorant in that area. Hayanotal Mimcha Eitzah, if he comes to ask you a question, Al titin lo eitzah she'eno hagenes lo. Don't give him advice that's not good for him. V'amru shalav zed kolel, and the Rambam says that the Chazal teach us that this lav also includes gam mishim isayei lidvar avera ogarma, also one who helps another person, who facilitates another person from doing an avera, or causes the person to do an avera. Why? Lefishu bal also ha'adam. Because the person that's about to engage in Avera is blinded by his taiva, by his passions, by his desire. He wants to eat chazer, he's hungry, he wants to eat a cheeseburger. So he's considered blinded in that area, not because of the Avera, the Rambam is saying, but because he's blind. He has a wrong philosophy. Amazing. V'nasa iver v'ozro b'tiyaso. And now the guy's blind, he's considered a blind person philosophically, and now you're aiding and abetting a wrong idea. So the Rambam is not so much concerned about the technical halachic violation as he is with, here's a person who unfortunately has a wrong approach to life. He's blind when it comes to his life of perfection, of shleimus. Oh, or perhaps yachin lo sibos aviraso, or you're giving him a reason to justify his behavior. V'alderech hazeh amru al hamalva beribis v'alova beribis sheshneim ovrim mishum lifnei iver lo sitin michshol. He says, and therefore, as a result, you'll say that people that engage in lending and borrowing with usury, with interest, is prohibited. Both guys are bad because I'm the malva, I'm lending you money. So by lending you money, you're borrowing money, you're paying me interest. So I'm doing an avera by charging you interest. You're doing an avera by paying me interest. If I didn't lend you the money, you wouldn't do the avera. And if you didn't borrow, I wouldn't do the avera. So both biyachad, so to say, are facilitating this avera. Lefisha kol echem mehem ozo lachavero. Because each guy, the Rambam says, sort of say, facilitates and enables the other guy to do the avera, because both guys are required. And many things similar to this, the Gemara says, over mishum lifnei iver lo sitin michshol is considered a violation. Upashte dekra hu mashes karnot chila. However, the simple understanding is what we said first. So what I find fascinating is, according to the Rambam, the real ikr of lifnei iver lo sitin michshal is not causing a guy to an avera. The real ikr is really the idea of giving a guy bad advice. That's what the isser is. It's not because I cause him to do an avera. And in fact, the only reason you can put causing a guy to do an avera, like giving him a cup of wine to another, under this umbrella, is because I'm enabling him to have a wrong approach to life. That's it. Very, very interesting Rambam. Okay, you with me? Any questions on this? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you say that or would you suggest that the Rambam over there is being called the second part in the same idea of remez?
No, he doesn't say that. He
so
says,
you hold it's an actual deraisa?
yeah, he says, "V'amru shelavze kolel gamish mesiyel l'dvar." Kolel means it's included, and it doesn't sound like a remez, like a nice thing. He seems to say that this is included under. Okay.
And when, shouldn't that include? Meaning, but he doesn't mention anything about the Mitzayim Kvaros type of case.
Like which case?
The Mitzayim Kvaros.
Oh no, he doesn't mention it. Now, here he talks misayel l'dvar avera because, right, he says, because you're taking a person, shesim ha'taiva riyaso, person was blinded by his taiva, right, and you're helping him. He doesn't talk about mitzayim kvaros, which would be above and beyond that. That's being proactive and being, 2 steps ahead. Apparently, according to Rambam, that would not be under the halachic structure of lifnei iver. Lifnei iver would be a guy who's defined as an iver, meaning he simply is blinded by the area, and you're taking advantage of his blindness, and you're aiding and abetting him, and you're not pulling him out of that. Now, let me ask you a question. How would you differentiate? Why do we need this? What about? There's an idea of midrash HaTorah. Midrash HaTorah. It means I can't. Not only I can't lie to a guy, I should stay far away from lying to a guy, right? So here the Rambam says I can't give a guy bad advice. In fact, one of the examples that Chazal say is a guy says, when's a good time to leave? I said, it's a good time to leave early in the morning. But I know early in the morning is when not too many people on the street and the crooks are out. The guy may get mugged, right? So I don't tell him that. So that's considered eitzah and hogenis. That's considered bad. So how do you differentiate between this avera and midrash HaTorah? What would you say? Why, isn't this a form of, deception would be a form of lying, right? What would you say? Don't be shy. So it could be, you could suggest as follows, that by a lie is an objective falsehood. I mean to say, I tell you that it's 9 o'clock in the morning now. It's not true. That's a sheker. Okay, that's a lie. Here, it's interesting. The statement itself is not intrinsically false. It's false for him. It's not good for him. You see, the Rambam says it has to be eitzah hogenis lo. So, for example, maybe a guy says, take an economic thing. I want a dividend-paying stock. So I tell the guy, okay, go ahead and buy Apple. Apple pays a dividend, right? But I don't tell him, let's say, according to many opinions, Apple's growth is over. I'm not saying it is or it's not, okay? But I tell the guy, I don't give him full disclosure. So I'm not lying to him in the sense that when I'm telling him that this thing pays a dividend, but I'm not giving him the full picture. You see? So it's not an eitzah hogenis lo. I have to know the guy's particular situation. You see? Let's say the guy's situation is that at this stage of life he wants another type of thing. So the advice that's good for him may not be the advice that's good for another person. In both cases, the statement is a true statement. You see? But it's not necessarily tailored for him. So that's why the Rambam says it's an interesting thing. I have to use the best of my knowledge. You have to give him Toreu al hadavar she'ata chosho shu nachon. You can only do the best that you can, okay? But it's got to be something that is eitzah hogenis lo. It's got to be something that's fitting for the person. So as long as you're using your best of abilities to give the guy advice, and the advice only factors in one thing and one thing only, what is good for him? Meaning, what I told this other guy may not work for this guy. This guy may require a gluten-free diet. This guy may require a different type of medicine. This guy may require a different type of financial advice. You follow? So I have to give the guy all the information that is pertinent for him. I think that's an important concept. Now, of course, yeah, go ahead.
Does that mean that if you're only halfway sure, you shouldn't say it?
That's correct. I was going to mention that. So why would it be sometimes a guy will give a guy advice that he doesn't think is good for the guy? I mean, are we dealing with a Rosh? I mean, it could be. Sometimes you have a person that really wants to mislead you on purpose, right? So I'm just trying to explain what's the mindset. So a guy comes to you for advice, you go to someone for advice, and they give you bad advice. So there's only two logical possibilities. Either he's doing it on purpose, because he wants to harm you, right? Or he's doing b'shogeg. He doesn't want to harm you. So why is he saying it? You tell me, why is he saying it?
Because it's good advice.
Because what?
Thinks it's good advice.
He thinks it's good. Well, okay, but let's say it's really not. So it could be it's to the best of his knowledge, but let's say he's not sure. Sometimes he still will say it.
He's trying to pretend that he knows what he's doing.
Exactly. Because a lot of times the guy's ego gets involved and he doesn't want to admit, I don't know. How many times does a person go to a doctor, right? And instead of the doctor saying, oh, I don't know, good question. I mean, top doctors do that. They say, you know what, I don't know, go to so-and-so who's an expert in the field. And they say, oh, I think you got this, I'll write your prescription, and it doesn't do a thing for you, right? And they're totally wrong, right? And out of that, they'll never reimburse you for that visit because they feel that, you took their time, right? And the answer is the ego prevents them from being honest and saying, I don't know. And I think it was Albert Einstein, he said, to learn to say, I don't know, is the beginning of intellectual integrity. That if a person is really an honest person and really is after the truth, I don't know. Nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. Right? And that's a mark of a chacham, to say, I don't know. It's only a person that's a foolish individual that has to try to make believe he knows, in all cases, that will come up with something which will not be good advice and it'll be harmful for the other person and harmful for himself because he's being dishonest. But according to the Rambam, assuming that you have a certain level of expertise in this area, you have the right to give a guy advice, he says, based upon what you think is correct, and most importantly, it must be exclusively for the guy's benefit. And again, realizing each person may be a different situation in finances in terms of what they need in life. When you're 20 might be different than when you're 60, 70. And the same thing in medicine. What might work for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person. Or what type of job a person should take. One guy can handle a job with a lot of stress, right? And obviously a greater salary. And another guy, giving that guy advice is going to be terrible. He's going to get an ulcer because he can't handle the stress. So you have to know the personality of the person and what works best for them. So I think that's an extremely important thing as well. Now, what's interesting now is a question the Minchas Chinuch raises. What about non-Jews? Can I give a non-Jew bad advice? Is this under the category of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol? So if you look at the Sefer HaChinuch, I'll read you the first line. He says as follows. He says, Shelo lahachshil b'nei Yisrael la'aseis lahem eitza ra'ah. Not to give Jews bad advice. So the Minchas Chinuch jumps right in. It says it sounds strange. What happened to non-Jews? It sounds like it's permissible, right? And if you refer to the Rambam also, and there's different textual editions of the Rambam, but this one says Ha'azhara, the warning Shehuzharnu, that we are warned, milahachshil ze ezeh besvara, one to another. And some, I think the Kapach edition has kitzasenu es kitzasenu, which means one section of us to one section of us. Again, implying that non-Jews would not be part of this issue. One technically would not violate Lifnei Iver by giving a non-Jew bad financial advice. Could be. Okay. So, of course, the question then becomes, if that's the case, how do we understand the Gemara? The Gemara that says you're not allowed to lahoshit, to give out a Eivor Menachai to a guy. That seems pretty clear that there's a violation of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol. Right? So, how do you say on the one hand it doesn't apply to Goyim, the other hand it does apply to Goyim? Right? You understand the question with me? Okay. All right. So, one could say, first of all, that perhaps Goyim are different, and the Minchas Chinuch wants to suggest this and rejects it, then maybe you'll say that there's a difference between the violation of advice and the violation of causing a guy to do a physical avera. Maybe you can make such a chiluk that when it comes to advice, not a mitzvah, but it's not an issur to give a guy bad advice. Maybe you could argue that. When it comes to an avera, that's what the Gemara meant to say, that you're not allowed to be moshid a Eivor Menachai to a guy. Now, I can't cause him to do an avera. That part of Lifnei Iver would apply to him. But the part of Lifnei Iver which says don't give a guy bad advice, maybe that doesn't apply to a non-Jew. You could suggest that. Minchas Chinuch says you could say that, but I don't buy it. And I'll tell you why he doesn't buy it. Because according to the Rambam that we just said before, and you asked the question, it seems like it's all one package. That it's nichlal b'lav zeh. included in the law of bad advice is causing the guy to do an avera. So it's not like there's two separate lifnei ivers. It's not like there's one big lifnei iver, right? So if there's one big lifnei iver, so how do we again explain how the Rambam on the one hand seems to suggest that you're not allowed to give bad advice, implying Jew to Jew, right? And yet the Gemara that suggests that even giving a non-Jew Ever Menachai is violation of Lifnei Ivor. That's the problem. That's the big problem. I don't know if I can answer. I'm going to suggest a possibility, and hopefully it works. But I want to share another Rambam with you, and maybe you'll say this is the part of the answer. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah deals with another violation. The violation, which is found also in the Mesivta Avodah Zarah, deals with selling Levona Zaka, a certain type of like incense to non-Jews, and or certain type of materials, not just Levona Zaka, any type of material that we use for idolatrous purposes. You're not allowed to sell it to a non-Jew who's going to use it for idolatrous purposes. And the Gemara says, why? Lifnei Ivor. Okay? Okay. Now, the Ram has a whole list of things that you're not allowed to sell to a non-Jew, and he talks about you're not allowed to sell them weaponry also because they can use weapons to kill Jews. And there's a whole question, unless you live in a country where they're going to be protecting the Jews, a whole list of items that the Ram says you can't sell to a non-Jew. And then he says like this. He says, Kol she'asa limkor l'goy, whatever you're not allowed to sell to a guy, also limkor l'Yisrael shehu listim. You can't sell to a Jew. It's not that we're ethnocentric and we only care about Jews and not Goyim. The answer is I can't sell it to a Jew either. If the Jew is a crook. Because it turns out you're enabling people to do averos, to be crooks. Okay? Anyone that induces a person who's blind to do an avero. And he gives him bad advice. Or he helps a person that's an over avero who is a blind person. Again, again, fascinating how the Rambam frames all the averos in a philosophical sense. The guy's doing avera is not the avera; it's the guy's blinded to the truth, and therefore he's following his passions and desires. Again, his Hilchos Avodah Zarah, he comes back to the same idea. A guy that comes to you to ask you advice, tein lo eitzah hogenes lo. Give him eitzah ha-hogenes lo, that's fitting for him. Again, the Rambam seems to say the essential thing here is not to mislead people philosophically. Now look what he says. V'asur lahasi eitzah tova l'goy o le'eved rasha. You're not allowed to give good advice to goy o eved rasha. I'm not sure how the reading is. I don't know if Rabbi Chay has a thought on whether it means l'goy kama o eved rasha or it means l'goy o eved rasha. Whether it means to say to a non-Jew and a eved who is a bad guy, or means a non-Jew and an eved who's a bad guy. V'afilu l'hasiu eitzah sheyaseh dvar mitzvah, or even to give him an eitzah to do a mitzvah. V'hu ami berisha. It sounds like the first way. He assuming the guy is a rasha. V'hu ami berisha, where the person is still a rasha, because otherwise it wouldn't fit in. Aser. V'lo nisnasa Daniel, and Daniel, right, in Tanakh, wasn't tested and thrown into the lion's pit, Ela al shahisi eitzalu Nebuchadnezzar, litain tzedakah, because Nebuchadnezzar was a rasha, ended up destroying the base of Migdal, was given advice by Daniel, Shenemar lahain malka malki yishbar alach. If you do this, my dear king, it'll be good for you. Meaning, if you give charity, it'll be good for you, right? So it seems the Rambam is saying that you're not allowed to give a guy, let's assume it means a rasha, good advice, right? So perhaps you could suggest that's why that would be consistent with the Rambam that says it's not usher to give a guy bad advice. Meaning to say, I'm trying to see if we can juxtapose the two, and perhaps you could explain why the Rambam says the Isra of giving bad advice doesn't apply to Goyim, because you see you're not allowed to give them good advice. Okay? Would you say that's consistent or not?
Yeah.
Okay, I say not necessarily, because you could logically maintain that you're not allowed to give a guy good advice, assuming he's a guy Russia, but it doesn't mean to say you're allowed to give him bad advice. Maybe you have to be neutral. You can't necessarily prove one for the other. I just want to mention that. Meaning to say that even though you may not be allowed to give Nebuchadnezzar or Russia good advice, it doesn't mean to say you would be allowed to give him bad advice. Okay, so we still have this problem of how the Rambam would hold when it comes to giving bad advice to non-Jews. What would the halacha be according to the Rambam? Now, just as an aside, I was just curious, like, why is it usher to give Nebuchadnezzar bad advice? I'm sorry, good advice. Tell him to give tzedakah. On the contrary, maybe it's a good thing to help the guy become a better person, right? So I tried to look up the pasuk when I was a couple hours ago. I was trying to look over some sources, but unfortunately I was in this big base midrash, and they didn't have a Tanakh. They had all the Rishon, all the Achronim, all the Svarim, because I had the Tanakh. So I couldn't check the source. So I'll just give you a possible suggestion. So it could be, it's something I heard from my Rebbe, Rabbi Zev in Far Rockaway, that sometimes a Rasha actually stumbles when he does a mitzvah. My shot, how could it be? Right? How could it be? A guy's doing a mitzvah, so it should be a meritorious thing. It's a good thing. He said he based it upon the HaTorah of Shabbat Shuvah. It says, Ki yesharim darkei Hashem, the ways of Hashem are straight. Tzadikim yelchu ba, the tzadikim will go in them. Right? Uposhim yikashlu ba. And the poshim, the bad guys, will stumble in it. So he asks a simple question. The pasuk, if you're doing a parallel comparison, it should say, Tzadikim yisharim darkei Hashem, the ways of the Torah are straight and beneficial. Tzadikim yelchu ba, the tzadikim will follow it. Uposhim won't follow it. That's what it should say. The tzaddikim follow it, and the poshim don't follow it. Uposhim no yelchu ba. Right? That should be the parallel in the pasuk, right? That's right. If with me, tzaddikim yelchu ba, u'rishoyim lo yelchu ba. What's pshat yikashlu ba? So he suggested a very fascinating insight. That sometimes a guy who's a rasha, that's a corrupt guy, does a mitzvah. The mitzvah further enforces his rishus. Why? Because he can now look himself in the mirror and say, I'm a good guy. I gave tzedakah. I did this. I shuckled during davening. So I could cheat and rob people in business. But my name is on the plaque somewhere, and I donated millions of dollars to a hospital. So I'm a generous individual. You see? So that type of a mindset, you see, it reinforces his rishus. Because if he didn't have the mitzvah in his mind to justify his behavior, so then he would have to face the difficult fact he's a rasha. You see? So it could be that's what the Ram means over here. That if you're giving advice to a person who's a rasha, and you're going to give them advice to do a mitzvah, they're not going to do the mitzvah for the right reason and say, you know what, my whole life is a wrong approach, and I should be a bal chesed, and I shouldn't be oppressing people. No. They'll think I should continue oppressing people. But look what a kind person I am, I gave charity. The Nazis in Machshamam did the same thing. Right? They would murder us, but on certain things, they had culture, they had art, they felt sophisticated, they felt like they're, decent human beings. They say the same thing about the mafia. Tremendous loyalty, they'll kill people, but they feel, a sense of compassion to animals, and they're do-gooders in a certain sense, you see? So it turns out, I think that's what the Rambam is suggesting, that it's also to give good advice, or even mitzvah advice, to a person that is a rasha, to a non-Jew, because it's going to end up strengthening them and justifying their behavior, which in fact is not a good thing for society. Okay, so now let's try to come back to this Rambam. Can I give a guy bad advice or not? And if I do so, do I violate lifnei ivor d'oraisa? I don't think anyone's suggesting you should give them bad advice, but if I did so, would I violate lifnei ivor d'oraisa? And it seems from the Rambam and the Sefer Chinuch, no, if it's a non-Jew, because he says the Yisro is only kutzasenu is kutzasenu, or zeh, or he says the word Yisrael, right? So it seems that I wouldn't violate lifnei ivor. But yet, on the other hand, it's asur lahoshe Eivor Menachai l'nachri. I can't give the nachri Eivor Menachai, which means apparently there is a concept of lifnei ivor by a non-Jew. So is there not? So I was wondering about this. So I was fortunate. I saw over here in the basement a Rabbi Meir, which I think could answer the problem. Perhaps. He says like this, commenting on the Gemara. He says, Kol shu mutar lanu v'asur la'acher, anything that is permissible to us but prohibited to somebody else. Isur hanichlal b'minyan shalanu mitzat Torah, something that is prohibited to us from the Torah. Kigon, yain l'nazir. Yain l'nazir is not prohibited to us per se, because I didn't take on a vow of Nazirus, but it's prohibited to any Jew that chooses to become a Nazir. Asur lanu litein lo koshel yain l'shnosa. You're not allowed to give him a cup of wine to drink. And by the way, interesting, the Gemara talks about, I know there's so much to analyze here, but the Gemara talks about it's only prohibited, the Gemara of Orasar says, it's only prohibited if he has no other way to get that wine. We'll get to that in a minute. Meaning to say, if he has a cup of wine in the fridge and he can get a wine himself, it's not a problem to give it to him because he could have gotten it anyway. It's only if Shtei Abri Dan to say there are two sides of the river, right? And the wine is on the other side, and maybe you'll be here and you'll pass it to him, but he couldn't have gotten it on his own. So that would be when there's a prohibition. But if in theory he can get it on his own, we'll talk about that in a minute, he says it would not be a prohibition. So in this case it would be prohibited, even though you yourself, kind of like the Meiri, even though you yourself are not a Nazir, are not prohibited from drinking wine, since it's also to him, you can't give it to him. Shaharei anu over b'zeh al lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. Ve'ein tzarach lomer masha asur l'nosein olam makabel b'shaveh. And certainly you don't have to talk about something that's prohibited to both people equally. For example, ribbis, the case of the Rambam. I can't collect ribbis, you can't give ribbis, right? V'afilu leven Noach, even to a non-Jew, ben Noach, also lahoshelo ever minachai. You're not allowed to give him ever minachai. Okay? Now we're trying to understand. How can it be there's an Isser ever minachai the ben Noach, and yet not an Isser of lahasiu eitza ra'ah to ben Noach? Vim asa kain over mishum lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol. And if you do so, you violated lifnei iver lo sitin mechshol. Listen what he says. V'chein kol kayotze bezeh. And so to anything similar to this, mimashu musar olav, on things that are prohibited to him, bidvarm ha'asurim lanu gam kain, to things that are prohibited to us as well. Okay? Aval chelev v'nevelev ha'kayotze behem hol ve'enon muzharim aleihem mochrim lahem, but I'm allowed to sell him stuff that is not prohibited to him. Afal piyush ha'asurim lanu, right? All right, but even though it's prohibited to us, v'chein masha also lehem itaras mimosem, are things that they have prohibited. Ve'enon bechlal mitzvasenu mochrim lehem, and things that we don't have prohibited, we can sell to them. So I think this helps us with the Rambam. Here's what I'm going to suggest. It could be the Rambam. I mean, it would seem to be from the simple reading of the Rambam. The Rambam does not hold that there is an isra of lifnei iver daraisa to give a guy bad advice. And yet that same Rambam says you can't cause a guy to do an aver and you don't split the two, even though Minchas Chinuch wants to suggest maybe I could say giving bad advice is one kind of lifnei iver and causing him to do an aver is another kind of lifnei iver. But it could be, so how does Rambam explain the Gemara that says you can't give a aver menachai to a non-Jew? The key might be in the Meiri that says I can't give him anything, mimashu musar olav, b'dvarim ha'asurim lanu gam kain, things that are also prohibited to us. Meaning, let's describe it for a second. You have the whole Torah, and you have lifnei iver, and we'll talk about this in a second. You have the whole Torah of 612 mitzvos, right? And 613 would be lifnei iver. Put that on the side. So lifnei iver is tofes, so to say. It grabs onto all 612. Whatever's in the Torah of those 612, lifnei iver impacts on. Now, could be what he's saying is like this. It's really no lifnei iver to a guy, but lifnei iver is tofes, the isser of Ever Menachai. Now, there's any isser that we have in our system, if the guy also happens to have that isser, it's going to grab onto that isser and say, I can't cause a violation of that isser. Not because the person is a guy. Technically, he's a guy, lifnei iver wouldn't apply to that, because according to Rambam, it seems that if I give a guy eitzah she'eino hogeneslo, I'm not a tzaddik, but I didn't violate the doraisa of lifnei iver. So how could it be by Ever Menachai I am violating lifnei iver? Assuming the Rambam paskins that way. I mean, it's funny, the Rambam doesn't have this case. Go to the Rambam, he doesn't talk about that case. You could suggest that it's also mishum lifnei iver, not midin, I can't give a guy, you see, Ever Menachai per se. But since Ever Menachai is a prohibition that he says is asur lanu and musar olav, that is prohibited to us and prohibited to him. So since it's prohibited to us, lifnei iver, so to say, grabs onto that isser and says, don't allow a violation of this isser. And therefore it'll turn out, I also can't give Ever Menachai to a guy. You understand? But not me'ikra din, not because lifnei iver applies to a guy. but it applies to all Isurei Torah. And if the Isur Torah is common to us and Goyim, I can't allow a violation of that Isur. That's what I wanted to suggest. It's possible.
You
Yeah.
can't give a Jew bad advice either.
What's that?
You can't give a Jew bad advice.
Right.
So why don't you say the same thing, that you can't give a guy bad advice because the Lefnever latches on the not giving bad advice.
Yeah, the only thing is, but then, the only question then would turn out you say that you can't give a guy, well, but a question like this, can a guy give a guy bad advice? If a guy could give a guy bad advice, it wouldn't latch on. I'm suggesting Lifnei latches on to an Isser that is essentially an Isser Yisrael, that is common to a guy. So if a guy could do that thing, then there wouldn't be Lifnei Iver on the guy. So since a guy could give a guy bad advice, it's not one of the Sheva Mitzvahs, right? So therefore, you could argue it wouldn't be an issur for a Jew to give a guy bad advice. I'm trying to explain one thing. Again, we're forced into a box. If you have another shot, I'm happy to hear it. Why the Rambam seems to indicate that the issur is primarily giving bad advice, and he says it's zeh, or kutsasenu is kutsasenu. According to the Sefer HaChinuch, he says asur li'ten li'Yisrael eitzorah. So it sounds like there's not an issur by a guy. I was trying to figure that out. I mean, you could say maybe it was Pashat, and the Rambam didn't mean it, but I don't know. I'm just looking at the Rambam, and that's it. But then we have the problem by Avram and Achai. How come I can give the guy Avram and Achai? Right? I'm not allowed to give the guy Avram and Achai, which is Lifnei Iver. So it could be that's what the Meir is alluding to. I'm just throwing a possibility out. That it's, since he says it's something that's Musar alav to the guy, which Varm Hasurim Lanu Gam came, so it means Lifnei Iver is Tofis that Isser, and therefore it will apply to the guy not because he's a guy, but because it applies to that Isser, and I can't have a violation of that Isser. But something that's not Usher to the guy, if the guy was able to do it, I would be able to do it. Possibility. Okay. So one last point. And then we'll try to get back to the ice cream store. Maybe we should eat some ice cream. So the Gemara has another interesting case of let's say, and it's interesting. I'll tell you what else is interesting. And again, Tzorachin, in the sense I welcome you all to examine this figure a little bit more. When the Rambam talks about selling stuff to a guy that they're going to use for idolatry, he doesn't mention a word of Lifnei Iver there either. It's very strange. He doesn't mention a word of Lifnei Iver, which again, I'm wondering, means to say that he doesn't know there's Lifnei Iver by Goyim, but it's Usser. You could suggest, again, this similar shot, because it's really an Isra of Avodah Zarah, and therefore it's a universal Isra, so it would apply to him, but not because he's a guy. Rambam's talking about not letting Goyim buy this stuff, or unless you want to say, possibly, that the Rambam discounts the whole Gemara and doesn't hold this Lifnei Iver by Goyim at all, just throwing a logical possibility. I'm not saying he holds that way, which would be strange. But the Isser by Goyim that he paskin, and he doesn't mention a word about giving a guy Avram and Achai, so he holds, he didn't paskin like that Gemara. But by Avodah Zarah, he says you can't start Goyim Avodah Zarah. It's a separate Isser of Harchakami Avodah Zarah. I'm just giving you another possibility. When you sit in the basement, you want to figure this out. You might say that there's a special Isser. Maybe he holds that there's no such thing as giving Avram and Achai to a guy. He doesn't care about that. He doesn't paskin like that Gemara. He does paskin. You can't sell a guy Levona Zaka. You can't sell him the stuff that they use for idolatry. Could be held not because of Avram, not because of Lifnei Iver, because it's a separate issue of Harchakami Avodah Zarah. You have to stay so far away from idolatry. That means you can't be involved in letting idolatry be out in the world, so to say, by promoting idolatry, letting a guy do idolatry. Kind of like Yaakov Avinu didn't want to be buried in Mitzrayim, lest they make him a object of worship. You see, you could say that. I don't think that's the pshat. It seems because the Gemara seems to indicate it is a problem of Lifnei Iver. But according to the Meir, you could say it's not Lifnei Iver because if he's a guy, and you have to stop a guy from violating Lifnei Iver. In other words, by a Jew, we have this concept of Kol Yisrael Areim Zalazah. I have to be good myself, and I have to stop you from doing an Avera. Like Tosa says, I got to be so careful not to facilitate your Avera, even Nisr Drabanan, right? But you might not have that concept by a guy. Why can't I give the guy Avram and Achai? Not because he's a guy and I got to stop him. But the answer is, this Aver is Tofes, that Isser of Avram and Achai, or Avodah Zarah, and that's a universal Isser. So I can't allow that violation, which Hashem said don't do, to be violated. That's what I was suggesting. You had a question?
Yeah, I mean, but if you can say the Rambam holds that you're not allowed to give to a non-Jew Avram and Achai, and also he holds you're not allowed to help non-Jews do Avodah Zarah for two totally separate reasons. Like the fact that you can't do help a non-Jew do Avodah Zarah is because there could be something inherently wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with giving Ever Menachai to a non-Jew except for Lo Sita Ever Meshul. So therefore, he would say it there. But by Avodah Zarah, there could be something inherently wrong with helping Avodah Zarah in the world.
Right.
So
The only thing
you
is
say it over there.
right. The only thing the Gemara in both cases cites the reason is lifnei iver.
Oh, the Gemara says.
Yeah, and the Rambam in neither case cites the reason as lifnei iver, and the Rambam doesn't bring down the case of giving a guy Ever Menachai. That's part of this dilemma. So did the Rambam reject that whole thing? You could suggest that, perhaps, because no indication that he brought into the Gemara that don't give a guy Ever Menachai. So then your question would be, so what about by Avodah Zarah? So I could suggest the possibility that if you go through Perek Tes of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, he doesn't mention a word about Lifnei Iver. He said, don't sell this to a guy, don't sell this to a guy, right? Don't sell all this stuff to Goyim, because they'll do Avodah Zarah. But it doesn't mention Lifnei Iver, so you could suggest he didn't hold this Lifnei Iver by Goyim at all, but by Avodah Zarah, and that's why you could, in theory, right, give a guy Ever Menachai. We'll ask the Rambam when we meet him one day, right? If he held to his mutter. But by Avodah Zarah, he said, no. Why? Because Avodah Zarah, like you say, there's something intrinsically wrong with idolatry. It's a denial of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, so that we got to stop. That's an issue for us as Jews to have a harchaka, to go so far away from Avodah Zarah, not to allow it. In the same way, for example, we're tovel our kalim. Why is that if you buy a pot in the United States, you have to tovel it? Because we say it came from Goyim, not because it's not trade, not kosher. They never used it before. It's a harchaka, me'avodah zarah, because it came from non-Jews. We want to distance ourselves from non-Jews. So you could say distancing yourself from non-Jewish philosophy is something which is an intrinsic thing, and we have to do it at all costs. Not because of Lifnei Iver. We have to demonstrate our rejection of idolatry. So you could say that. The other thing I'm suggesting is, assuming the Rambam accepts the Gemara of Ever Menachai, and accepts the idea of Lifnei Iver, but it's not Lifnei Iver because of Goyim. I don't have the same responsibility to a non-Jew as I have to a Jew. By a Jew, I have to stop each and every Jew I see from doing an Avera, to the extent that I can, because I can't allow him to do an Avera. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zolazah. You see? But by a guy, I would only have to stop, not the guy, I'd have to stop the Isser from happening, the violation of the Dvar Hashem from happening. So if they have a common Isser that we have, I have to stop that Avera from taking place. Not because Lifnei Iver per se applies to Goyim. That's what I was suggesting. So go ahead.
Oh, the Avodah Zaka has other purposes.
Right.
Does it have other purposes besides Avodah Zarah?
Right.
So they're really two different cases, because Chavta intrinsically is not necessarily used for Avodah Zarah. So my Lifnei Iver, how could my Lifnei Iver be to sell a guy something, follow him to his house, and find out what he does with it?
Okay, great question. So the Gemara deals with that, and the halacha l'mais is that it only applies if you know whether it's a chazaka or a numdana, a very reasonable assumption is going to use it. So the Gemara even says, this is actually the next case, I could sell the guy a ton of Lazona Zaka. Why a ton? Because he ain't using a ton for Avodah Zarah. Right? If he asks for 5 ounces, maybe. But a ton of the stuff, he ain't using it. So what's he going to do with it? He's going to sell it. So the Gemara says, L'schar is mutter. I don't have to, if I'm selling the guy for business purposes, for his business purposes, not my business purposes, it's permissible. Right? So then the Gemara says, 1 second, but maybe he's going to divvy it up and sell it to 1,000,000 Goyim. Right? 2,000 pounds, whatever. Do the math, he's going to sell it to a lot of Goyim. Correct? So I am indirectly causing Avodah Zarah. So that's what the Gemara says. I want to take up the last case. That's called Lifnei de Lifnei. That's considered Lifnei Iver of a Lifnei Iver. I'm not responsible for that. I can't sell it to him because I don't want to let him do Avodah Zarah. But if he's a wholesaler, I sell it to him and he's going to sell it to others, it's not my problem. Okay? Now, what about a Jew? Can I sell it to a Jew that's going to sell it to a guy? Is that a case of Lifnei to Lifnei or not? You hear the question? Another, I can sell it to a guy. I can't sell it to a guy knowing that this guy is going to sell it to another guy. And that end user is going to do Avodah Zarah. I can do that. Why? Because that's too far removed. That's called Lifnei to Lifnei. To sell it to the guy directly, that's Lifnei Iver. And based upon our understanding, because I'm making sure he violates this Isser. Or, if you want to say as we suggested, because that's a universal Isser of Avodah Zarah, so I'm I'm causing someone to violate the Isser. But to sell it to a guy who's a businessman, nothing wrong with that. That businessman is going to sell it to another guy? Not my problem. 2 steps removed. 2 steps removed. So what about a Jew? So what about, the Gemara says, halachically, and we pass in this way, I cannot sell it to a Jew who's going to sell it to the guy. That sounds like discrimination. I can't allow a Jewish businessman to make money. Right? It's a Jewish warehouse guy. He's a wholesaler. So if I sell it to the Jewish wholesaler, no good. Right? That's considered a violation. If I sell it to the guy who's going to sell it to a guy, it is good. Yeah, go ahead.
Because the Jew's not allowed to sell it. The guy is. So
Exactly. The Jew, the middleman, is not allowed to sell it because he's going to violate Lifnei Iver. So I am causing him to violate Lifnei Iver. Right? Exactly. So that's a problem. Right? In other words, my Avera is to cause this guy to do any Avera, including Lifnei Iver. So the middle guy, the Jew, is going to violate Lifnei Iver by selling to the end user. But a guy doesn't have the Yisr of Lifnei Iver. So by selling it to the guy as a middleman, nothing wrong with that. Because I'm not causing him to violate an Isser called Lifnei Iver. Right? Got it? Okay. So back to the ice cream store. I don't know. So there's a couple other things you should know. Number one is, it only applies if there's no other way for the person to get the Dover Osser. So in this particular case, I can tell you in the 5 towns, there's plenty of ice cream shops around, and I'm not sure, that would apply. So therefore, it's ostensibly permissible. And the other question is, to what extent is that considered, deceiving a guy, or to what extent? I assume the guy knows what his health is. And by the way, just because the guy may be a little overweight, maybe he has low cholesterol, maybe ice cream is okay for him. So there's many issues over here, and one could argue that. If a guy knows all the facts and he's not an Iver, there's not going to be a violation over here. So I think you'd be hard pressed to, it's wonderful to be so medactic in mitzvos, but I think we should be more concerned about the fundamental thing, is not to give the guy incorrect philosophy. So maybe next time a guy comes into the ice cream store, ask him his philosophy in life. And if he's wrong, give him a free scoop of ice cream and then try to sit down and schmooze with the guy and then correct him. But simply to get into these types of chumras, I'm not sure is really halachically based. Yeah, go ahead.
What would be the problem with selling ice cream? What's the bearer?
Well, they want to say, since it's unhealthy for the guy and the guy has to watch his health, so you're enabling the guy to violate the, it's another question. Since it's not a direct isser, it's an isra seisa, nishmatim lo nafsho seichem. You should watch your health. So now the guy's going to be in violation of that. So therefore, you have to, again, but honestly, you can't sell pizza, you can't sell meat, you can't sell any product because you have to check the guy's blood
That means
pressure.
you wouldn't be allowed to eat cake either, because that's also.
You couldn't sell him anything, it's not just ice cream, but I don't think you go that far.
But
Yeah.
maybe they're saying it just,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not saying it has validity, but I'm saying maybe they're saying it from the side of advice, that more than the side of actual.
Now you're giving a guy
cost.
bad advice.
Yeah, you're saying, here, have an ice cream cone, really the guy shouldn't have an ice cream cone, it's misleading.
Well, you're not misleading the guy. I mean, the guy knows, I'm sure the guy knows his situation, like I mentioned at the TV
Yeah, but this
report.
typo could be stopping him from,
Okay, so you
He's buying
pointed.
himself.
What?
He's buying it himself.
He's buying himself,
So
right?
he's giving you bad advice. He thinks nothing wrong with this. He's
He's about to you, that's right. So you should point to the thing and tell the saturated fats and the cholesterol, you point to the thing, and if he still wants to buy it, I mean, I'm not passing for you, your Rosh Hashiva will pass me that one. But I really want to focus on the main isra of Lifnei Iver, which is really to give the guy an Eitzah Hoganis low. And I think that's very important. Number one, to be smart enough to admit, I don't know, and not to give advice just because you want to show you're a big chacham. If you don't know, then stay out of it and refer him to someone that does know. And the funny thing is, they'll respect you more for it. So if a person is looking for cover because he doesn't want to give a guy bad advice, he'll end up getting more cover if he's honest. Okay? And the second thing is that the Eitzah has to be Hoganis low. Understanding that the Eitzah has got to be tailor-made to that person, and a different person with a different set of issues or problems or concerns might be best advised to do something differently because he's got a different set of circumstances. So I think that's extremely important. We can say there's no cookie cutter of what works for a person. It's got to be what that person really needs, and that would be the real mitzvah. And that's really what our obligation is. Okay, guys. Yeah, I'm sorry, question?
Wasn't me, I think it was Max.
What's that?
I said okay.
Max.
I didn't hear.
Question, I'm sorry.
Question?
No, I'm good.
Okay, fine. Any question? Yeah,
No, I'm good.
you're good?